This is episode 10 of Art Why I Stuck with a Junkie Jazz Man. In episode 9, Synanon stopped smoking and Art left. In episode 10, Art sends Laurie a letter and she makes plans. This episode is headed Leaving. I'd been ready for Art to go. It didn't hit me at first as hard as one might think. My life was so busy running the print shop, therapizing newcomers, and I was surrounded by kind friends reminding me that Art was probably shooting heroin right now at this very moment. An adorable young Irish dope fiend photographer from New York, a newcomer, hit on me immediately, and I considered him. I even kissed him once in a dark corner. He had a coarse, fast-growing beard. His face was too rough to suit me. No one in the world, I knew this, could replace Art in the lovemaking department. In February, Art sent me a surprising letter. He was working for Bob and Nikki Deal, two Synanon splittees who'd opened a successful bakery in Venice. He was keeping their books and running the daily operation of the plant, which shipped whole grain breads and cakes to high-class markets all over L.A. Art had the use of a car and a room in their house. He said he loved me, missed me, wasn't using drugs, and had been faithful to me. My knee-jerk Synanon reaction was to turn him down, and I did. I couldn't believe he was sober, and I never thought that I could save or change him. Synanon had educated me too well for that. But then I started thinking about how this would be the ideal time to leave if I ever wanted to come back and have Synanon deal gently with me, as they always did, I knew, with women, the weaker sex, who left for love. I had also been thinking for a long time about how Art's reminiscences would make a book. In the guest room, when he told me stories from his life, I thought he was like Othello, describing his great battles to Desdemona. That's how he wooed me. Except in Art's tales, he was rarely the victor. He was often romantically, captivatingly vanquished. By then, I'd read The Children of Sanchez twice. It was a book by the social anthropologist Oscar Lewis, the biography of a Mexican family. They told him their Rashomon-like stories in poetic personal language, and Lewis put the family's history together in a way that made the whole more powerful than any memoir or novel I had ever read. I'd been thinking that's how Art could tell his story. He could tell his remarkable life in his own extraordinary language through me. And I would interview his friends and family, too. This was something I could do. Most people crave personal satisfaction and public recognition, but each of us asks that these things come in idiosyncratically imagined forms. My own amorphous ambitions had always and only to do with artistic achievement. Put simply, I wanted to be Art, but I lacked the natural ability, the inborn genius. Well, what I was beginning to think I might have was a talent for what I'll call a vital appreciation, a habit, when I was intrigued, of sharpening and narrowing my focus. I'd already expressed that visually in my photographs. I thought I also had the gift that Oscar Lewis had for recognizing vivid narrative. Lewis found his vehicle in the Sanchez family. Art Pepper could be mine. So at that time, I thought I might have finally found a way to satisfy myself, to justify my existence. I would produce something that I could believe was important, And because Art was so charismatic and his story so sordid, scary, so romantic and sexy, the world would agree with me. I could never have expressed it then as I have now. It was an idea mostly felt. After Art wrote me, the idea gathered strength and power. At the same time, I told myself I was simply rationalizing my deep desire to be with my lover again. One of my mentors, Tom, stopped me in a passageway one day and said, apropos of nothing, "You know, if you join him, you'll wind up right beside him, in the gutter." I told him, yes, I know. But, I thought, I'd have a higher purpose than simple lust or love. I'd be his biographer, not his partner in the downward slide. Tom would have bust a gut laughing if I'd said that out loud. I must have asked the I Ching about my plans. I was introduced to the Ancient Qing, a Chinese fortune-telling book, by a friend in Synanon, and I've been tossing the 3 coins steadily for more than 30 years for decisions trivial and big. And the Qing must have endorsed my plan, or I wouldn't have gone ahead with it. I called the phone number in the letter and discussed some of this with Art. He seemed ambivalent on the phone about my joining him. He said his room at Bob and Nikki's was too tiny for 2 people. I told him I wanted to do a book about his life. I'd get my own place. I acted self-possessed and calm, but Synanon had instilled in me a fear of the outside world and a fear for myself in the world. I was 31 years old, and I was terrifically afraid as I plunged into the troubled, thrilling, deep waters of my fate. At about 4 or 5 one weekday morning in February, I gathered up a very few of my few things. The Qing, a binder holding all my negatives and proof sheets, a sweater, underwear, and a rusting little tin placard surmounted with a glass thermometer and advertising Camel cigarettes. I'd pried it off a rotting timber on the Santa Monica Pier. I tiptoed out of the back bedroom of the apartment I occupied while a newcomer on her bed in the front room pretended to be sleeping. I closed the front door quietly. The day was palely, barely starting when I got into my mother's car. She turned the key and said, "I think you're making a terrible mistake." I said, "If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all." I went into Synanon at 28 with such a chaotic, raving, grieving, ravenous heart, with the social habits of a feral adolescent, and just enough self-knowledge to despise myself. I came out 3.5 years later, a more or less civilized and satisfied adult, with a sense of my limits and of my considerable capacities. I got this from living for the first time ever in a setting where real demands were made on me. I was expected to play a significant role within a responsive community, and found I was able to do it. I realize that people raised in authoritarian households can never understand how precious that was to me, who was raised in neglect and freedom that disabled me. What a gift to finally be given a rule book and then to be rewarded for good behavior with status, respect, privileges, and punished for bad, with vituperation and ridiculing games and loss of status and privilege. Early in my Synanon adventure, I encountered a woman who was an old friend of my mother's, a fellow Trotskyist, an alcoholic. We were sitting by the pool in the clump And I was writing to a friend of mine from the early days of my marriage to Barrett, trying to tell him what Synanon was like. I asked her how she'd describe it. Quoting Karl Marx with a wicked little grin, she said, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his need." Another gift from Synanon. I was introduced to the essays of Ralph Waldo Emerson, long paragraphs of which I silk-screened onto the propaganda posters I made in my art workshop in the school. And from memory to this day, I can still roll and taste his bracing, gorgeous sentences on my tongue. They still warm my heart. This might be my favorite. "Oh, believe as thou livest, that every sound that is spoken over the round world, which thou oughtest to hear, will vibrate on thine ear. Every proverb, every book, every byword that belongs to thee for aid or comfort shall surely come home through open or winding passages. Every friend whom not thy fantastic will, but the great and tender heart in thee craveth, shall lock thee in his embrace." Ralph Waldo Emerson, The Oversoul. One more thing. Not long before I made my decision to go into Synanon, I met a woman in a Will Wright's ice cream parlor in Hollywood. While I was waiting for my cone, she came up to me, and in that same mechanical, rapid, rote sotto voce with which maniacs insistently deliver the good and bad news about Jesus and hell, she told me she'd discovered a phrase, which, if you chant it, brings you anything you want. She said it, then she wrote it on a napkin. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I took the napkin with me, and sitting in my car, between licks of peppermint ice cream, I read it and repeated it. What the hell, I thought. I said it over and over again for the next few weeks. What I wanted was to be saved, and soon I found myself in Synanon. This is the same phrase that Tina Turner later said was key in her emancipation. So I just had to tell you that.